Do you personally feel that LGBTQ rights are improving or declining across Europe, broadly speaking, say over the past few years? See, this is a question that I asked myself recently, and it inspired me to do some digging and to find out the answer to this question by comparing the queer rights records of European countries over the time frame of 2020 to 2024, in order to see which countries on the continent are moving in the right direction and which are simply not. The way I decided to accomplish this was to look at data corresponding to the last 4 years, provided by the much-loved ILGA Europe, an NGO that focuses on the tracking of and reporting on LGBTQ rights across the world, with a specific focus on Europe and its periphery. So, today we are going to take a look at the countries in Europe that have experienced a decline in LGBTQ rights when measured from 2020 until now. And if you find this subject interesting enough, then next week I will release another for the countries trending in the right direction, of which there are thankfully many. Also, before we begin, it's important to briefly understand the methodology for how the scores that I am using to determine which countries have trended upwards or downwards over the last 4 years are calculated by ILGA Europe. Their official website says the following on this subject. We rank the countries on the basis of laws and policies that have a direct impact on LGBTI people's human rights under 75 criteria, divided between 7 thematic categories: equality and non-discrimination, family, hate crime and hate speech, legal gender recognition, intersex bodily integrity, civil society space, and asylum. More info on the ILGA Europe's methodology is linked in the description. Also, before we jump into exploring the countries that have been trending in the wrong direction from 2020 to 2024, I want to give a disclaimer that ILGA Europe has a rather maximalist view of what counts as Europe and includes countries like Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkey, Russia, and so on. People love to debate which countries should be considered European or not, but for the sake of this video, we are looking at all countries that ILGA Europe considers to be part of the continent. And in my opinion, the more information about the more countries in the region, the better, regardless of if a country is completely European or not. Now, with all of this out of the way, let's jump into the data, where the highest country up on this shameful list is the UK. In 2020, the United Kingdom was given a score of 66 points, which at the time meant the UK was tied with Portugal and Finland for the 7th highest score in all of Europe, an absolutely incredible showing. But unfortunately, now in 2024, the UK has dropped 14 points and now has a score of only 52, placing it in 15th place in Europe, just behind Ireland and just ahead of Switzerland. And as such, I do think it is useful to point out that while the UK is tied with one other country today for the largest decline in LGBTQ rights over the past 4 years in Europe, it does at least remain above average for the continent and even higher by global standards. Yet, still, the trend is quite alarming, to say the least. The main areas of decline for the UK over the past 4 years have been in a handful of various subcategories that fall under the larger umbrella categories of legal gender recognition and equality and non-discrimination laws, along with asylum for LGBTQ people. For those interested in a more detailed dive into the specific categories in which the decline has been taking place, I will link in the description datasets that you can explore, not only for the UK, but for every other European country, since we don't have time to cover each and every subcategory for every country today. But the high-level takeaway is that trans rights, anti-discrimination laws, and asylum laws for queer people seeking safety are the 3 major areas where the UK has been backsliding most over the past 4 years. For those in the UK, the best way to react to this data is to get out and vote Labour in the upcoming election, and for the rest of us, we can only hope that this massive 14-point decline will soon be reversed swiftly. Moving on, the other country tied for the largest decline in LGBTQ rights over the last 4 years is Montenegro. In 2020, Montenegro had 62 points, which placed it alongside the Netherlands, tied for 11th place in all of Europe, which was an especially incredible feat, considering its location in the West Balkans. But, unfortunately, over the past 4 years, Montenegro has socially regressed, and now has 14 points less than it did in 2020. With 48 points in 2024, Montenegro has fallen down 9 spots to 20th in Europe for LGBTQ rights. Still far from terrible, but a very troubling trend to say the least. The largest areas of decline in Montenegro over the last 4 years have been in the categories of equality and non-discrimination, and in the legislation around protections from hate crimes and hate speech. And notably, the category of family, which includes things Montenegro has still not achieved yet, like marriage equality, has remained quite low in 2024, matching its score in 2020. So there's been no decline in that area, it's just stayed extremely low. As pro-Russia, anti-Western, and radical Orthodox Christian ideologies sweep through Montenegro and the Balkans more broadly, the previously impressive country for queer rights is now on a very scary trajectory. But despite this frightening trend, for now Montenegro remains relatively safe for our community, especially compared to most of its neighbors. And hopefully this negative trend over the last 4 years will soon reverse, and the evils of the primitive and warmongering Russia, Serbia, and radical Orthodox Church will be overcome. In third place on this list of shame, we have a country that is only surprising because the state of LGBTQ rights were already so bad in 2020 that it is shocking it could fall much further, but once again proves that stupidity and evil have no limits when the Russian government is involved. 4 years ago, Russia had a score of just 10, which made it 4th worst in Europe, with only Armenia, Turkey, and Azerbaijan being worse. But this year, Russia has collapsed to rock bottom with a score of 2, 8 points less than 2020, and is now the absolute worst country on the continent for LGBTQ rights. Back in 2020, Russia did have a small handful of positive laws in the categories of family and legal gender recognition, and this is how they were able to pull off a score of 10, measly as it was. But now in 2024 with a score of 2, each and every right and protection has been stripped away other than the right of single individuals to access medically assisted insemination, which is considered a small win for closeted queer individuals in the country seeking to raise a family. But likely, the only reason that this one single positive law still exists is because the Kremlin does not view it as relating directly to the benefit of LGBTQ individuals. Or simply because they have still yet to do away with it officially, as they already have done, bit by every positive law that existed 4 years ago. See, Russia is quickly becoming one of the worst countries not only in Europe, but in the entire world for LGBTQ people according to other NGOs like Equaldex. And they are working day and night to spread this hatred around the world through military conquests in Ukraine and Georgia, coups in African countries like Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso that they are personally arranging, and through funding anti-LGBTQ propaganda across the world, but particularly directed at incels across Europe and North America. So let us all hope that our leaders in the free world do enough to stop Russia, as every day that Russia continues to exist, countless LGBTQ lives are destroyed across the world, both inside and outside of Russia's own borders. Now, before we dive into the rest of the data today, I want to invite you personally to join the Queer Kingdom and become a part of our quickly growing community. You can officially join the Queer Kingdom here on YouTube for $1 a month, which will help me make this channel my full-time focus as soon as possible. You will get access to some cute custom queer emojis, epic crown icons next to your comments on this channel, and they change and evolve the longer you are a member, or as I like to say, a citizen. You can check the comments to see if you can spot any existing members in their crowns. It was super fun to design, so I hope you like them. Also, while monthly live streams will be public, they are moved to the members-only feed afterwards, and controversial videos covering heavy subjects that are not quite YouTube-friendly are also privately posted for citizens of the Queer Kingdom, so that we can all stay informed, despite the videos not quite being YouTube-friendly. And finally, joining the Queer Kingdom here on YouTube gives you more access to me through private community posts and chats. I greatly look forward to meeting you and working together to create a safe and prosperous world for our people, one step at a time. The country that experienced the 4th worst decline in LGBTQ rights over the past 4 years is Georgia. It is located south of Russia in the Caucasus region, and in 2020, Georgia had a score of 30 points, which happened to place it tied with Slovakia for 30th in Europe at the time. Not at all a good showing, but still above a decently sized chunk of the continent. But now, in 2024, Georgia has fallen 5 points and is now only 32nd in Europe, and just about tied with Italy. And it gets even worse because in 2024, Georgia has already passed a series of anti-LGBTQ laws and has essentially stopped even attempting to present itself as a democratic and free country, opting instead to embrace Russian-styled authoritarianism, despite the fact that over 80% of Georgia's youth support LGBTQ rights, future EU accession, and have attempted to resist Russia's total takeover of their government, but so far to no avail. I actually made a video covering the subject in detail for those that are interested, but it was demonetized and restricted, so I have moved it to be available only for members here on YouTube, so it's there for those that are interested. What this means for the purpose of today's video is that while Georgia already saw a 5-point drop over the last 4 years, by next year's 2025 report, Georgia will likely drop to one of the lowest on the entire continent, next to Russia and Azerbaijan, as essentially all LGBTQ rights have now been stripped away, including even the right to privacy. Being queer and even supporting queer rights can land you in jail. This is a taste of what a Russian political victory looks like, and it is beyond terrorizing. Moving back west now, we see that there are 3 countries that tie for the 5th worst performances over the last 4 years in Europe, and they are the Netherlands, Ukraine, and Luxembourg, all of which have declined by 3 points, but for different reasons. In 2020, the Netherlands had 62 points and was tied with Montenegro as the 11th best country in all of Europe for LGBTQ rights, which is quite impressive. But in 2024, the Netherlands had fallen by 3 to 59 points and had fallen to 13th place overall, being passed by France and Germany. The small dip of 3 points was primarily in the area of equality and anti-discrimination. Yet, in the grand scheme of things, the Netherlands is still an incredible country for queer rights, and being 13th best on the continent is still a solid accomplishment. However, even though a loss of 3 points from 4 years ago is small, it is worrying nevertheless, especially as the country has, as of this year, been governed by a right-wing coalition that generally does not prioritize LGBTQ rights at best and could prove hostile at worst. Compared to other right-wing parties across Europe, the newly empowered Dutch right does generally seem less antagonistic, but it remains to be seen how they behave towards the community now that they are in power. Certain parts of the new coalition are more anti-LGBTQ than others. It remains to be seen what the new government's impact will have, but hopefully the Netherlands is not about to experience a massive UK-level deterioration over the coming years and can preserve its open and free reputation. As most already know, Ukraine is in the middle of fighting for its very existence against brainless orcs from the east that are doing whatever they can to conquer and reincorporate Ukraine into their tyrannical empire. And this has left Ukraine in an odd position, where its current leaders clearly and publicly recognize the importance of expanded human rights and liberty, but also are not prioritizing the passing of progressive laws, as the political willpower is currently focused on simply staying alive. President Zelensky has stated his intention to legalize civil unions or even full marriage equality as soon as possible, and the country's desire to one day join the EU and to maintain good relationships with its Western allies means that supporting queer rights is geopolitically advantageous for them as well. And what this means is that if Ukraine manages to secure its borders and fend off Russia indefinitely, there is a high likelihood that LGBTQ rights will flourish in Ukraine. But for now, the country is more focused on continuing to exist, and its legislative energy is focused on this. In 2020, Ukraine had 22 points, which placed it 37th in Europe, just behind Italy and Lithuania, and just ahead of Bulgaria. Now, in 2024, there has been a 3-point drop to 19 points, remaining ahead of countries like Poland and equal to Romania, but still a decrease nevertheless, likely driven by war-related decisions to limit certain rights more broadly. In the years to come, should Ukraine survive and have the opportunity, we will likely see an explosion of queer rights across the country as soon as there is the political will and bandwidth to do so. The final country that also saw a 3-point drop over the past 4 years is Luxembourg. In 2020, Luxembourg had 73 points, which tied it with Belgium as the second best country in all of Europe for LGBTQ rights. But now in 2024, Luxembourg has fallen to have 70 points, where it is now just above Norway as the 8th best. Still, an incredible accomplishment for Luxembourg, but despite the fact that 8th out of the entire continent is no small feat, any kind of decline should not be ignored. The particular area of decline has been primarily in the area of legal gender recognition, which is a category they still remain extremely high in even after this small decline. But let us hope this is temporary and that the trend will soon reverse so Luxembourg can start moving again in the right direction. Before we end today's deep dive on the countries trending in the wrong direction in Europe, I did want to quickly mention Belarus and Malta. Perhaps the only thing they share in common is that they both experienced very small drops in LGBTQ rights over the past 4 years, but from exact opposite ends of the spectrum. Belarus declined by 2 points from 13 to 11 over the past 4 years, and is now one of the very worst in Europe, ahead of only Armenia, Turkey, Russia, and Azerbaijan. As Belarus is a puppet state of Russia, this really was not a surprise to anyone. Malta, on the other hand, fell by a single point from 89 to 88, but remains in 2024 as the absolute best country in all of Europe for LGBTQ rights. So, despite this tiny decline, I don't think we have to worry too much about Malta. They are awesome, simple as that. Lastly, Austria, Hungary, Romania, and Azerbaijan have all experienced zero change in their score from 2020 until now, and while stagnation is not preferred, it is at least better than decline. Austria is stagnating at a pretty decent spot as it is tied for the 17th best place in Europe, where Hungary and Romania, on the other hand, are near the very bottom of LGBTQ rights in the EU and have immense work left to do before they can be considered free and safe countries that truly respect human rights. And finally, Azerbaijan has not moved down, but that is likely because it would be nearly impossible to get any worse, as they remain tied with Russia as the very worst country in Europe for LGBTQ rights, with only 2 points. This tragic situation means that stagnation is simply not an option for them, and that Azerbaijan needs to rapidly work to address its systemic persecution of queer individuals. But unfortunately, for the time being, this seems highly unlikely. But together we can at least shine light on these issues and work in our own unique ways to help make the future freer and safer for everyone in our queer family around the world. And for those interested in diving deeper into the data and understanding the exact details of which areas countries across Europe are improving and declining in, please check out the description box, and you can use the links there to take you to interesting and useful datasets created by ILGA Europe. Now, for our weekly queer news story, we have an encouraging one, where a new development out of Peru happened on June 25th, when a transphobic bill that had been passed earlier this year was overturned, after hundreds of protesters in Lima, Peru's capital, demanded it to be scrapped. This bill had labeled transgender individuals, along with so-called cross-dressers and those with gender identity issues, as being mentally ill. Local queer rights activists were quick to highlight how the new bill only made the social stigma worse for transgender and gender-diverse individuals more broadly in the South American country. Peru already has a reputation for being one of the least socially developed countries in all Latin America, and one of the few in South America particularly to not yet have marriage equality. Reversing this transphobic bill is an important step for our community in Peru as they continue fighting for the same rights that are already widely present across much of the region. Best of luck to them, and congratulations on getting this heavily misguided bill scrapped so quickly after its passing. It's important for me to always end a video by highlighting the fact that just you being here today really does mean the world to me. And it is my deep hope that you stay around and join this increasingly powerful community here at the Queer Kingdom as we fight for our future. And until next time, friends, much love and blessed be. QK out.